I'm always very cautious about recording. I'm saying this while I'm recording, um, because I wonder, you said this, you got to be careful what you say. Ruth Darman is joining us. One second. Here she comes. Okay. First of all, thank you to all of you for coming. The fact that anybody's even interested or wants to come and listen is to me a miracle. I would never have guessed. I thought it would just be me and Esther. Where we do it. So, but because Esther has been a great co-host. So you have to start off. I want to start off. In Rosh Hashanah, if you want to ask mechila for somebody, you want to ask for forgiveness. You should do it in a way that the person understands that what you did might be wrong publicly. You have to ask mechila. You're supposed to say to somebody, "I'm sorry, I did something wrong." So I brought up Esther. First of all, I did something wrong to Esther last Shabbat. She doesn't know what it is yet, but I'll tell you what I did wrong. And I'm saying I'm apologizing in it right now. What I did was Esther was grateful. She was graciously accepted to come last Shabbat and to read Torah and to daven. And she had a chair set up beside the big shulchan, beside the Torah table. And she was going to sit there. She likes to be away from people because right now we're still in the pandemic. And Esther, whatever you want to say, there's a BA5 variant that's spreading around everywhere, and people have. So I said to Esther, "You're not sitting there. Go sit on the bima." And I said, I had no right to do that. Now, she did sit on the bima, but really I should have left her alone. She should sit wherever she wants to sit, not where I tell her to sit. So I apologize. You can sit wherever you want, Esther. The fact that you come is good, and you shouldn't be told where to sit. Anyway, all right, I said it. That's done. The next thing is I was asked a question before everybody arrived by Dolores. It's a great question. And then, interestingly, Ruth brought up a different situation, but a very similar, because I said, it's not nice last week. I said, it's not nice when somebody is considered a goses. We talked about the word goses, meaning someone who is inevitably dying. That's what a goses is, somebody who is dying. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. Well, I said, you don't, when the person's in the hospital bed or in their home and they're lying in the bed and they're considered a goses and they're dying, you don't wheel in the casket past them so they can see. You don't do that. You don't stand there with the rabbi and discuss the funeral in front of the person. It's not kavadik. It's not nice, and you're not even allowed to do it. It's asur, according to our rabbis, according to Chazal. When I say Chazal, that refers to our rabbis. Now, then Dolores came today with a question. She said, "Well, what about prearranging your funeral? Because many people do that," she said. Many of her friends have done it. I'm actually thinking about doing it myself as well. Because why? Because I want to make sure that my family doesn't go and pick out a fancy box for me, a casket. I don't want that. I want to be in a plain, and you have to make your wishes known, what you want to have, how you want to be taken care of, where you want to be. So Avraham purchased the Machpelah for Sarah in the Torah. He bought the plots, right? Lawrence is shaking his head. Yes. So I got an approval there. Thank God. So you don't always get an approval by Lawrence. He knows too much. That's the problem. He has the library and he knows. So, and he also has a Wurlitzer. He has three or two jukeboxes, which I'm coming over to see in a couple weeks because six. Oh my goodness, he collects jukeboxes and has 1,500 records. I got to come over. Anyway, I think you're on, what street are you on in the manor?
Coxfield.
Coxfield, right around the corner.
You know where Bathurst Manor is?
I have a house in Bathurst Manor.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
That's Searle. All right, so anyway, what is a goses? Who is considered dying? And are you allowed to arrange a funeral for yourself? 100%. You can arrange a funeral. You can choose everything and make your wishes known. You can go to the funeral home. You can prepay. You can do that. There's a distinction between doing that yourself and wanting to make your wishes known. Even in the case where somebody says they want to have assisted death, some people do that. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm just saying there are people that want that. And it is also not only allowed to do that, but then Ruth said, somebody called her up and said, I'm calling the funeral home, and I'm going to start to make arrangements. I want to know because people have to come in from out of town and they've got to be here. And do I make the funeral for Tuesday or for Wednesday? And the person hasn't died. The person hasn't died. Are you allowed to do that? Well, you know, if your intentions are the right intentions, it's not such an awful thing to do. I personally wouldn't do it. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but it's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. Because there are circumstances when you might be having a daughter or a son that you say they're dying, they might die, they're inevitably dying, they are a gosses, they are considered a gosses, they're going to die in 3 days. I'll give you an example. Rochama is with us today. Her brother just passed away. If she would have known a week in advance, she might have been able to arrange to go to Israel, Teretz Yisrael, to go there in advance. You know, it's hard. It's hard when you get notice somebody passed away in the family to all of a sudden just jump and go, and then it's afterwards anyway. It's already what we call b'diavad. It's already happened. It's not like l'chatchila you're thinking. If you're thinking ahead of time, the person is going to die in 3 days. I need to help to make arrangements. Do it, but there's a difference between making arrangements where the person doesn't know and making it in front of the person. You don't knowingly, I said, pull the pillow from under the person's head to help them die faster, because if they lie flat, they'll die quicker. No, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to move the person. You're not allowed to help them die. You're allowed to take away things that are preventing them from dying. So making arrangements beforehand in front of the person is not allowed. Separately, it's an interesting question. Something to think about. And certainly that's done all the time. So we were talking last week about, we started to talk about the difference between the prohibited kinds of assisted suicide. I'm going to use that word. I should say assisted dying, whatever. And because that word suicide, we have a negative connotation to it. You know, we hear that word, we think right away awful things happen to people that have illnesses, mental health issues. Thank God we're more aware of mental health today, and we understand that there was a time when somebody took their own life. They were buried like by the fence outside, away from the whole section. There was like a shanda and a charpa to the fence. Not anymore. We don't do that because we know that there are illnesses attributed to someone wanting to do that. If somebody does that, they're very, very depressed. And the Talmud recognizes depression, and so does the Chazal, so do our rabbis. Look at the cases of the Rav Moshe Feinstein. We talked about it in the case of abortion, when that woman who had the Tay-Sachs baby was afraid when she got pregnant the second time she was going to have another one, and they made and he said, you must go speak to the Tzitz Eliezer, to Rav Eliezer Waldenberg in Yerushalayim, and get a decision from him, because he's probably going to paskin that abortion is the right thing to do in this case. If she's going to be suicidal, what do we want that for? That's not good. So in a case like that, he paskin that abortion was the right thing to do. So depression is very serious. The difference between prohibited kinds of assisted suicide and permitted kinds of assisted suicide, isn't that interesting? What a permitted kinds of assisted suicide. How do we say that? How do you know in real cases what to actually do? So I said, we looked at what the Shulchan Aruch said. We looked at what Rav Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. We looked at the, in the last class, if you watched or whatever, we looked at Rav Moshe Esserles, the Ashkenazi position on, who also wrote his own Shulchan Aruch, competing at the time, and then they decided they would meld them together. And we said we would look at the inside and outside margins of the Shulchan Aruch to see what others say. So who are on the inside and the outside margin? We have the Shach and we have the Taz. And who are these people? So I have a few notes I'll share with you. If I have them here, let me see. Maybe I don't. Oh, here we are. Okay. So first of all, the Taz is David Halevi, Siegel. No, but if you go to any yeshiva anywhere and you say, "Oh, I'm studying David Halevi Siegel," they'll look at you like you're out of your mind because they don't know who you're talking about. Because every yeshiva bacher they only learn the abbreviation, which is the Taz. If you say the Taz, they go, "Oh, the Taz." But if I don't give you a name and I don't say who the Taz is, I'm talking about someone who you might say, "I know the name Taz, but I don't know who it actually is." So those letters were given after the abbreviation of his title, and he was a significant halachic commentary. He was born in Loomer. Volnya Siegel was the son of Shmuel Halevi Siegel, and who was a chief Torah teacher. He was an older brother. And maybe today, Rochama, maybe your brother would have been the Taz of today, right? Maybe he would have been that person.
Yeah.
And then we have the Shach on the other margin, and the Shach is Shabtai ben Meir HaKohen. Shabtai ben Meir HaKohen is known as the Shach, and he was a noted 17th century Talmudist and halachist and became known as the Shach. And he was born in Vilna, Lithuania. He lived from 1621 to 1662. So, think about it, 1621 to 1662, 40 years old he lived. Well, how does somebody become so great? I mean, in those short 40 years, don't forget, the first 2 or 3 years, you're not writing halacha. So how brilliant you have to be to accomplish that in those short years. So the Taz from Germany, Western Europe, represents a whole controversy. If you are actually moving the body, and we said you weren't allowed to do that, of the patient, that's called using your hands to hasten death. You move the body, even the gurney, you're not even supposed to move it. If you move it, then you're hastening death. You're promoting, you're encouraging death. He said that's you're not allowed to do, but what you must do, what you do has to be external. Well, for instance, as was mentioned in earlier cases, remember we talked about the wood chopper and he's out there, he's chopping wood, and the person's lying in the bed and they're concentrating on a thing, and it's going, oh my God, if he would only stop chopping, I could die in peace, stop chopping, And the daughter goes out says, please, can you just stop chopping wood? That, he said, is allowed to be done. And the Talmud gives an example of plucking the salt off the tongue. Why would they put salt on the tongue? Because it would give you something other to concentrate. In those days, what they believed, we don't do this today, of course, but they believed that, let's say you had, someone said, oh, I have a sore right shoulder. Okay, I'll punch you on the left shoulder and you won't think about the one on the right shoulder. It's an old Jewish story, right? We used to say that. No, I'll hit you on the other side and you'll forget about the pain on your right side. It's true, because if you have a mildly sore knee, but you get a really bad sciatic pain, all of a sudden the sore knee doesn't seem like anything, because the sciatic pain is much worse. So what they used to do is they'd put a lump of salt on the person's tongue, and all you could concentrate was that sensation of the salt on your tongue, and it would help you forget about the pain that you have in your knee or whatever it is, right? So they said that plucking the salt off the tongue, assuming that the mouth is open, okay, come on, so it's far-fetched. I guess somebody could lie there if they're dying and they're about to die with their mouth open. I've seen that, They say then you're allowed to pluck it off. You're not allowed to open the mouth. You're not allowed to open the person's mouth to pluck the salt out. But if the guy's mouth or the woman's mouth is open and the lump of salt is on the tongue, you're allowed to take the salt off. That is similar to stopping the wood chopper from making the noise. So you're not moving the patient. By not moving the patient, that's correct. And the Taz goes on to say, he says, it seems to me, in my humble opinion, which means he probably wasn't so humble at all, that how on earth is it going to be possible to remove the salt from the mouth of the patient without moving the patient? You'd have to pry their mouth open. You'd have to open it up. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do that. The slightest moving of the patient could hasten their death. If there's a reasonable expectation of saving a patient, then of course this doesn't apply. But if you're doing it, whatever it is that you're doing is prolonging suffering, then hands off is the rule. Hands off. You keep your hands off. So according to the Taz, as long as you don't actually move the body, you're doing the right thing. Now, according to this, the terminal patient, so that's the word we're going to use for a gosses, okay? The terminal patient. That's the English way. By the way, when is a gosses a gosses? When the doctors, when the physicians, when the healers in the time of the Talmud said, nothing is going to work. I got a very upsetting phone call last night on a personal note. A very dear friend of mine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He's an older gentleman. He's not so old. I mean, compared to this room, he's young sometimes. He's 85. And he has a very positive attitude. Now, the doctors are saying that the cancer treatment center will manage the pain. It's stage 4. They're not going to be able to do anything to help this person. So the question is, in my davening today, and I was thinking about this person, do I say the tefillah, the paragraph that asks for healing? Because we know prayer doesn't ever hurt. Prayer can't hurt. But is it appropriate to ask Hashem for someone who is now, if he's terminally ill and he's dying, do I ask God for a refuah shalema? We know it's impossible. Well, maybe nothing's impossible. Maybe miracles happen. So maybe I should say it. Maybe I shouldn't be saying it because it's, in effect, asking God to prolong suffering. I'm not giving an answer to that. I'm just bringing it up as an interesting concept. It's an idea. If somebody is dying and it's inevitable that they're going to die soon, should I be saying a mishaberach for that person? Should I be asking God for healing? I don't know. If anybody has an opinion, you can speak out.
Why not? Is the best doctor, God. We always say, El na refan Allah.
100%. You know what? I'll share a story with you because I think the personal stories are as important as the learning, because of what Rochama just said. Now, it's a personal story. I hope my wife doesn't mind me sharing this story. I'll ask her Bechila before I share it, but it's a true story. We had a call about 2 years ago that her sister wasn't feeling well, and her sister went into the doctor, and the doctor said right away, go to the hospital. You got to get checked out. They did a scan, and they told her that she had ovarian cancer. Very bad. Very bad. 2 small children, and we're already thinking ahead, miles ahead. What are we going to do? Who's going to look after the children? We already thought this is not a good story. Anyway, they opened her up to perform a surgery to remove what they could. And guess what? The scan was wrong, they said. The scan had showed droplets of blood that looked like it was cancer, and there's no cancer. She's completely clean. Now, is that a miracle from God? Or was that a wrong diagnosis because they actually opened her up and were ready to perform surgery, cancer removing, whatever you want to call it, surgery? Is that a miracle from God? Laura was saying, please God, this is not the time for my, so did God say, oops, I picked the wrong person. I didn't mean, I'm going to leave this person alone. And the Malach Hamavis passed by. El na rafan Allah, Rochama said. She's 100% correct. So I guess prayer doesn't hurt. I guess that's the answer. But it's an interesting story that here's a case. And then imagine what's going through a person's mind when they're told you have this. And then later on, they close you up, you're out of it. They seal it, and you wake up and they go, guess what? You're clear. You have nothing. That was her story. certainly you're relieved. You have a life now. But the scary, I mean, that's enough to kill somebody, just that scare. So I don't know. But God is the best doctor, Ruchama says, and I have to agree. So
We say also in the Shacharit, I think, רופא חולים. So
right. So okay. So we should include people. I guess that's our opinion. We have to have our own Zoom opinion. We have to talk about it. So we do. So we learn something. Thank you. So if there's a reasonable expectation, the Taz says, of saving the patient, then it's a different story. But if all you're doing is prolonging suffering, he says, forget it. So here's this. According to that theory, according to this, the terminal patient, okay, the goses, is suffering at this point and being kept alive by some medicine, let's say. Or perhaps they're being kept alive by a ventilator, a ventilation. Whatever it is that's keeping them alive, according to the Taz's thinking, Lawrence isn't going to like this, but I'm going to say it. Where you stay? Yeah, okay. According to this, it's correct to stop the intervention and stop the ventilator and stop the medicine. And this can be done without touching the patient, without moving the patient, and the suffering will end and the patient's life will come to an end more quickly. And this is all correct according to the Taz. I didn't say that's what we follow yet. I'm just saying that's what would be correct according to the Taz's opinion. If the mouth was open and you're plucking the salt off, it's okay. You didn't touch the patient. You just removed. If you tell the wood chopper to stop, if you remove the ventilator, I'm not touching the patient. I'm not touching the patient. I'm unplugging the ventilator so that I'm stopping the defibrillator that is implanted in the person by a computer or a remote device to turn it off so that the defibrillator, in case the person should have a heart attack, they can die quicker without being kept alive to suffer longer. I'm taking away devices that are prolonging life and prolonging suffering. Now, we have an opinion there by the Taz, and now the Shach from Vilna, from Poland, representing all of the Jews of Eastern Europe, whenever there's this kind of controversy, says that if we've established that you're allowed to do whatever it is that you want, as long as you don't move the body and it's while it's alive, what's wrong with preparing the graveside or the coffin? This is what Ruth was talking about. Ruth brought this up before we started the class. So Ruth is now, Ruth, you could have been the Shach, you see? So you thought about it all by yourself without even knowing what the Shach says. So he says, what's wrong with it? Like, why can't you, get the coffin ready, get the person to start making it? Remember in the old Westerns when the undertaker would come in the little bow tie, the bolero and the white thing, and they'd pull out the tape measure and start measuring the person's body so they know how long to make the casket. That was in the old John Wayne movies. Anyway, so he says mutar, it's permitted. So if the patient is unaware, okay, Ruth, he's answering your question. He says, if the patient is unaware of what you're doing, the truth is that there's no prohibition. The problem is if the patient is aware. See, Ruth, you're a genius. You don't even know it. So we don't want to depress the patient. Depression is very important. We don't want to cause emotional stress. So therefore, as long as the patient is not aware, all is well, halachically speaking. Halachically speaking. The Shach is even more lenient than the Shulchan Aruch in allowing the preparation of a casket, in preparing where the grave is going to be. And there's nothing wrong with following the strict position of the Shulchan Aruch. But if you found yourself in an unusual position, see what the Shach says? If you found yourself in an unusual position, remember we said it's not a halacha is not always a black and white formula. Sometimes it's a case of a makom tzorech, a time of need to do something. Or if you're in a very difficult, challenging position, you have people that have to come and make arrangements to be able to fly in from wherever it is in the world, and you want to figure out what you're going to do. You know the person is a ghost. They're not aware. They're going to die. They're terminally ill. You're not making them aware of the situation. So where it's more practical to reply to say, you know what, we're going to follow the shach, then ye shall mili smoch. Like you can there's something to smile upon. There's something that you can rely upon. You have an opinion by the Taz, you have an opinion by the Shach. These are two great authorities. So you have something to lean on, something to rely upon. If you said, we made arrangements, but we didn't tell my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, we didn't tell them that we're making arrangements. We know the person's going to die in 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours. We don't know exactly when. Only God knows. Only Hashem knows. But we know it's soon. It's inevitable. I find the word inevitable interesting because inevitable, they don't say, is it 3 days or 2 days or 4 days? But I'll bring that up in a second from something else that I learned. Because aren't we all gosas in a sense? We're born. We're all going to die. Well, not me. I'm going to live for it to be a million years. I'm not dying. I don't want to. But everybody, we all do. I'm kidding, but we all do. And then, I mean, I'm a gosas from the minute I'm born. I'm already dying. I'm already like 1 day closer to dying. So, I mean, but on the other hand, we learned previously in another class that if you visit somebody, visiting meant long travel. It didn't mean that you go to visit somebody and you get in your car and you drive from Toronto to Hamilton and you say hello and you find out they're getting worse. So you get in your car and you drive back to Hamilton. We had trains today. We have airplanes. They didn't have that. They had a horse. If you're lucky, maybe you had a donkey or a camel and a jug of water and a piece of bread. If you were lucky, you didn't. What did you have? So imagine traveling on your camel from Toronto to Windsor. It might take you a long time. So you get there and you visit the person and they're a gosses, they're dying. It says in the Talmud that you can do Kriya after 3 days. You don't even know if they've died. You don't even know if they've actually passed away. The Talmud says that you're allowed to do Kriya after 3 days because at that time, there was no way to know. You're going to write a letter. You get the letter a month later, you're going to find out. So, that's what they said. So if your journey back was a 4-day trip, they're teaching us that after 3 days on your way back, you're already in the period of mourning. You do Kriya and you finish your journey to come back. So we have two opinions. We have the Taz, we have the Shach. They're not really, they're far apart in terms of don't move the body or don't move the body, but you're allowed to prearrange. But there's an approach that many of the mainstream poskim, the Rabbanim today, follow. And it's called the Perush Baitlachem. Who wrote the Perush Baitlachem is Rabbi Yehuda Fatia. I believe Rabbi Yehuda Fatia was Egyptian. I have to look it up. Or was he from Morocco? Can't remember. I have to check. So he says, it is forbidden to push off the death of a patient, and you're not allowed to do anything to lengthen the life of the patient. But what are we talking about? Who are we talking about there? We're talking about someone who is about to die. Remember we said someone who might die in 2 days, 3 days. If you are administering medicine, if you're giving them drugs and medicine, which is keeping the dying patient alive, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. I guess that's where oncologists and palliative doctors have to make decisions that say it's time to take him off, her off, them off chemotherapy. The chemotherapy is not working. It's not helping. There's a time to say we're not allowed to administer medications that are just prolonging, they're preventing death. And what Rev Yehuda Fatya said was, you got to step back. You got to let the patient die in peace. If there was some reasonable expectation, if there was some thought or idea that there's a cure, well, maybe if we try this clinical therapy, this new treatment, drug development is big on clinical trials. We have a lot of clinical trials. That's what Laura does. She works for drug development for clinical trials now for head and neck cancers. And they find other successful drugs, like a Merck drug, let's say, and they team it up with a different drug, and they combine them, and they come up with cocktails and solutions that will help shrink tumors and helpfully, possibly give somebody 3, 4, 5, 10 years of life. That's a different scenario than someone who is just about to die. So there is a time when you step back. But if there's a reasonable expectation, of course you have to try a clinical trial. It's the right thing to do. But in the case before us right now, he says, aside from a miracle, and we don't know. By the way, doctors are wrong. Doctors make a lot of mistakes. If doctors were right all the time, I would be minus one kidney right now. In 1993, 94, I had a kidney stone. I went into the hospital. I won't tell you which one. And the hospital said to me, your creatinine level just came back on the report, and we are preparing you for surgery. We are removing a kidney to save your life. That's what they said to me. Okay, so they said, don't worry. I'm going, what do you mean you're taking? They said to me, it's okay. People live on one kidney. You'll be all right. And I'm going, no, you're not. I want a second opinion. I want to check somewhere else. I was really upset. Doctor comes in the room an hour later, and he says the person transcribed the number wrong. It was 90. They wrote 900. They added a 0. It's a mistake. We're very sorry. You don't need surgery. Go home. You'll pass the kidney stone. Well, what if they would have done the surgery already? So they do make mistakes. There's two cases, you see. Everybody's got a case or a story in their own family. I'm just giving you ideas of things that happen. So, there's a balance between saying the person is ill, they have an illness that is causing them to die, but there may be a clinical trial that can help this person. The person has the right to say, I don't want to do a clinical trial. I'm right. I don't want to do it. But if the person can have it and it can help and it could possibly prolong their life, of course, the right thing to do is to do it. But if you're just preventing the person with those medicines or the chemotherapy or whatever it is by trying to prolong agony and suffering and the what's going to inevitably happen very soon anyway, that's the wrong thing to do. All right. Now, the Torah says in Parashat Mishpatim, if two guys are fighting and one strikes the other one and injures him, the bad guy who injured his neighbor has to pay compensation. We covered that a long time ago. So the work that he misses, the suffering, the agony of not being able to walk properly, let's say, among all the things, you have to pay medical costs for that victim. And the commentaries on the Torah ask a very simple question. Why did the Torah have to teach us this? The Torah teaches a lot of things that are not practical today. And the Talmud has to give lengthy discussions and arguments from all the rabbis of all the things that we're trying to decipher and learn from the Sefer Torah so we can apply something practically today. I mean, outside of beautiful stories like Noah and Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, and Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and all of the fascinating stories that are in the Torah, there's a lot of stuff in Leviticus that I now find fascinating. But as a kid growing up, who wants to read about sacrifices and what they wore? Who cares? What do we care? So, but there's a lot of stuff in there to learn from. So the Gemara is saying, since the Torah teaches us this, it implies that medical treatment is permitted. Period. Well, if medical treatment is permitted, then the Torah tells us that the perpetrator, the person that hit the other person, struck the other person, punched them, whatever, they have to pay the medical costs. They have to look after that person. It teaches you an obligation for your fellow man. Cain and Hevel, right? We think about what happened. So you can't just stand by. It says, do not stand by while your neighbor is dying. How many times does that happen? People, I don't want to get involved. Two people over there, let them, turning my head the other way. I don't want to look. If I didn't see it, I don't know. I don't want to know. You're not allowed to stand by while your neighbor's dying. But it says you're not required to risk your own life in doing so. So a person has a gun, and they're going to kill somebody, and you can kill the person with the gun, go ahead. But I didn't say go ahead and kill them. I never said, I take that off the recording. I'm not telling you to kill anybody. Chas v'shalom, we're not killing anybody. But what I'm saying is that would be, according to the Torah, the right thing to do. Like the case of the rodef we talked about in abortions, that who is the pursuer? We said if the person is pursuing someone, you have to remove the pursuer. But you're not required to do so if the person is aiming the gun towards you now. Run. Get out of the way. You don't want to get shot. Why should you risk your own life? You're not required to risk your own life. But you can choose. You can choose for yourself if you want to risk your own life because it's so important that you save that person. You're willing to risk your life. Well, that's up to you. What's up to you is up to you, but you're not obligated. There's a difference. So let's take a look. What does that mean? The understanding from the Perush Baitlachem from Rabbi Fatya is that every single medical intervention, whether it's the simplest treatment, the simplest drug, the simplest concoction that you're going to take, every medical intervention, if it's simple or not, whether it's even a simple dental procedure, you're having a simple dental procedure, there's always a risk of injuring the patient, isn't there? You're having wisdom teeth removed, and you get put out, and they're removing impacted wisdom teeth. Is it possible that this patient could suffer a heart attack during that treatment or something, God forbid, chas v'shalom, something? Yes, it is. It can happen. It's not often. Today, they're much better at it than in the old days, and things got improved. I heard someone told me that today cataract surgery for eyes is it's a very successful procedure and people can see, and it's much easier today. People go home after having it right away. Originally, when they first started doing it, you had to lie in the hospital for 3 or 4 days with sandbags at the side of your head, holding your head perfectly still. You couldn't move. You couldn't anything. You had to keep your head still. That's what I heard. So it was like it was a very serious procedure. Look where they've come today, especially with all of these laparoscopic surgeries and things that we can do today. So the Perush Baitlachem continues on, and Rav Fatya says the Torah in Mishpatim had to give us permission. The Torah had to say, if to inflict pain and suffering on a patient in order to save the patient's life. Well, to inflict pain and suffering in order to save the patient's life. What does that mean? If all you're doing is lengthening the patient's suffering, that's all you're doing is making them suffer longer, the Torah never gave us permission to do that. The Torah didn't say save somebody from from dying. You're going to just give them drugs and medication and just prolong their suffering and their agony, and they're going to die anyway. So if you prolong a patient who is dying, you prolong their life, you're not allowed to do that. So if they started a course of treatment and it turns out that all of the treatment is doing, all that it's doing is prolonging suffering, remove the medicine, remove the ventilator, do it gently, and be careful not to move the patient, because you're not allowed to move the patient. Removing a ventilator is not moving the patient. Does every rabbi agree with me? Lawrence will tell you 100% not. There's a lot of people in the Haredi movement that would say, no way, every single thing, don't you dare touch that ventilator. But the ventilator is keeping the person suffering and agonizing and living longer. And if they're suffering, then according to the Perush Baitlachem, which is what the mainstream poskim follow, the correct thing to do, you can always find an opinion that will tell you you don't remove anything. There's always another opinion that is going to tell you the opposite. The Rambam wrote, in order for a medicine to be effective, the medicine has to do something to the body, otherwise it's completely useless. All right. So if you're taking a medication and it's just a hocus pocus and it's not even doing anything, then that it's stupid. The medicine that does something opens up a door to risk. Think about every medication that anybody takes. You take you take metformin. Isn't that the drug for diabetes? Is that given for diabetes? I know. Yeah. All right. Got a thumbs up from Bernie. I was right. You know, that drug can have serious effects on some people where they end up with stomach cramps, stomach pains. They can't adjust to it. They can't get used to it. They got to find a different medication. It does not work for everyone. There's a risk involved in taking a medicine like that, but it works wonderfully well for many, many people. What works well for one doesn't necessarily work well for the other. When you take a simple there was a drug, I'm trying to think of it. It was an anti-inflammatory. When I was a little kid, around 12, 13 years old, it was very, very popular for young women, especially, and women to take when they had their period cramps. And it was an anti-inflammatory. And it was found out later on, it was like they took it every single month for a week. It was burning a hole in their stomach. They took it off the market. There's a risk involved in taking drugs. You take acetaminophen, it can affect your liver. You take Advil, it can affect your kidneys. And maybe it's vice versa, but I think that's the way. So if you have liver disease, maybe you can't be on acetaminophen every single day. You can take it once in a while if you have a headache, but not all the time. There's a risk involved in even the simplest medication. There's always a door that opens up to risk. Morphine. So in the case of somebody who's really, really, really sick, morphine does something to the body that relieves pain. You hopefully forget about the pain. On the other hand, it also slows down the heart rate. When you get on a morphine, and then your respiration goes down, and then you're not breathing as quickly, and then they're trying to balance you in the hospital. The reason I know this is because over 25 years, I've lived in the hospitals. I've heard every doctor talking to patients and every respirologist and every cardiologist. And this is just my own personal experience. I'm not a doctor. I'm far from it. I'm a son of a gun or a son of a pharmacist, one or the other. But I know that I listened carefully to what they say. And Rabbi Scheim, to his credit, he laughs about this because he never paid attention to what the doctors and the nurses were saying in the hospital. He visited, said, and left. I'd always come out of the room and I'd say, did you hear they said that? Because he always said to me, he says, you always pay attention to the medical stuff. I said, because it fascinates me. You know, when you have morphine, and now they're saying, holy cow, their respiration is down. They're not breathing. They're having trouble. We got to get the oxygen level up because the morphine is dropping it down. Now they got to balance it. Can't give too much morphine. We got to give just enough to balance it. All of these medications have a great risk. Parkinson's medication, dopamine, very, very challenging to adjust mobility with cognitive function. When you take a drug like that, that increases mobility, the person can have hallucinations from taking the drugs. So since we're talking about a terminal patient in this case, who is very fragile, and they're about to die, suppressing respiration by giving morphine might be enough to kill the patient. Wow. We're giving morphine. It's suppressing the respiration. Are we killing the patient? You know, it's an interesting thought. Any medicine has a death rate associated with it. Any medicine. And that's why they do clinical trials, because before this drug can really come to the market on the mass, I mean, you know how many drugs are trying to get developed and they get squashed. They never even get to phase 2. You know, there's like, I think 4 phases of study: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then phase 4, and it goes to the market. They try it on mice, they try it on humans, and then they go to humans, they try it in 20 different people in 20 different countries, and then they take the drug and then they have to try it around the world en masse doses to many, many people. And then if the drug is working and there's a success rate, what is a success rate? A success rate could be prolonging life for 6 months in the drug development world. If someone has a terminal illness, why is that considered a success rate? Because if we don't learn through drug development and having that success rate of extending for 6 months, we might not develop the science so that we can extend it for 12, 18, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's how drugs are developed. We have to start somewhere. So if the kavanah, remember we talked in Judaism, it seems that everything comes down to intent. The intention, what your intention is. If the kavanah is that in administering the medicine, your kavanah is that we're trying to help the patient, we're trying to benefit the patient, then it's allowed, even though there's a risk that the medicine might kill the patient. So if my intent is, this patient is suffering, I'm giving them this morphine because my intent is that even though it might slow down their respiration, we have to try it because it might save the patient's life, then that's okay. But wait a minute. That puts a very, very big burden, doesn't it, on the doctors? The doctors that you're talking to, the oncologists, the palliative doctors, the doctors in the Odette Cancer Treatment Center, the doctors that are in all of the hospitals working. And what about all the rural areas? They don't have doctors. They've got practical nurses if they're lucky. I'm up right now in Crystal Falls, Ontario, coming home today. I was talking to some people last night. There's no doctors here. There's one doctor in Sturgeon Falls. Nobody can get to see the person. The person's so busy, they can't take on any patients. Nobody wants to live up here. I'm in the middle of nowhere in the bush. You have to drive 30 minutes from this camp that I'm sitting in to get through the bush into town. And there's a lot of people living up here, and you wouldn't believe how they're living. And the only person they get to see is a practical nurse who refers to get the opinions from the doctors. Some of those nurses might know more than some of the doctors, but it puts and in the Talmud, they don't say doctors. They don't say Rofe. They do say Rofe, but they mean it to be not a physician. They mean it to be a healer. It could be anybody. It could be anybody that's a healer. So it puts a huge burden on these people that are administering medicine, that they have to think carefully and say, am I trying to cure the patient or am I trying to hasten their death? Am I trying to speed up the patient's death? Because that you're not allowed to do. or am I trying to just cure them? If I'm trying to engage in an act of assisted suicide, it's simply prohibited. You cannot give the medicine. But if they are trying to relieve the suffering, then of course there's always a risk and a possibility of an unwanted side effect. The unwanted side effect, I gave the morphine, the respiration went down, the person died. That wasn't my intent. It can happen and the patient can die. But your intention was to help the patient. If the kavanah of the practitioner, of the healer, of the doctor, of the physician, of the oncologist, is to help in healing. So what are we learning from all this? Assisted suicide is correct if we are talking about passive euthanasia. Assisted suicide is correct if you're talking about passive euthanasia. That is defined not by Marshall Loomer. It's defined by the poskim, meaning that refraining from anything that will prolong suffering. Not only is it correct to refrain from anything that will prolong suffering unless there's a reasonable expectation for a cure, but it's wrong to pursue a course of action which is going to do nothing else but just prolong suffering. You can't just continue to take a course of action that's all it's going to do is prolong the person's suffering. And that's what the Perush Baitlachem, what Rav Fatya just taught us in the previous, what we learned moments ago. He said that the permission to administer a drug, in the case of morphine, depends on the intent, the kavanah, the intent of the person, the practitioner, the doctor, the healer. So you're not doing anything that will push off death if it's a terminal patient suffering. I'm not going to go into, because it's already 6 minutes after, so we'll talk for a few minutes, but I'm going to, next week we're not having a class. I'm going to run all the minyanim. I'm actually on vacation next week. I'm going to be on all the minyanim because I want to be on to help out. Esther's going to help me, and I'll do it remotely from up here. But I think we'll skip next week, but we'll continue the following week afterwards. And I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to go into the modern poskim. We're going to see really what today's poskim are going to say. We're going to see first what Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein says. I love the Aruch HaShulchan. It's an outside of the box. He is the Aruch HaShulchan. He published in 1918, and then the books weren't selling so well for a while, and now they're selling at all the yeshivot. They're starting to look at it more seriously. But the Aruch HaShulchan sometimes looks outside of the Shulchan Aruch. So if you hear the Aruch HaShulchan, we're talking about Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein. And it was later on, after he passed away, his daughter, Brina, tried to get his works more out into the world. And she married a rabbi, I'm trying to think of his name, and together she encouraged yeshivot to republish and to buy it. And to her credit, she did that. But you know what? It was such a chauvinistic world back then. And when the daughter, at the very first set of volumes of books that were posthumously put out of the Aruch HaShulchan, you'll see her name inside, Brina Baldinsky, I think it was. Baldinsky. I think she married a rabbi, Baldinsky, and they put it out. So what happened was, I'll just turn the phone off for a minute. And what happens is, by the way, that I have to take that call in 2 minutes. That was the funeral home calling. While we're talking about assisted suicide, I have the funeral home calling. So what Rav Michal Epstein, his daughter, did was put out the works, and then found out that because her name was on it, they had a woman's name inside that she was publishing her father's works. No yeshivot were buying it. Oh, it's put out by a woman. We're not going to buy it. It's a shame. It's a chaval al azman, chaval, nachon, Rachama? It's a chaval, because look at the geniuses that we have in women. So, Nechama Leibowitz. So I think that we need to be aware of that. But you'll find in the later volumes that are put out now, I just bought, there's one that's published in Hebrew and English, put out. It's a beautiful set on one of his volumes of Shabbat. I have it at home, and it's incredible. I hope they publish all of them like that, because then people can opens it up to the world. But her name isn't in it anymore. It's just only his name, because they know that the yeshivot will buy into it more. So we're going to see what the Orach HaShulchan says, and we're also going to look at the Minchat Shlomo. We've looked at the Minchat Shlomo many times. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who lived in Yerushalayim. And then after we look at that, we will look at, of course, who else? The Igrot Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein. And we'll see what the modern poskim say on everything that we've learned so far, and that'll lead us to a better conclusion and understanding of where we're going with assisted dying. Any questions?
Can I suggest something? As a matter of fact, I'm every Thursday at 10 o'clock at Toronto time, there is a Rabbi Ankin. I don't know if you heard about him, from Bet Shemesh, and he's giving this way tomorrow on this subject: death, mourning in the Jewish law, and how to do it. Exactly on this subject.
Right.
It's tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Rabbi Ankin. Very interesting.
It's Rabbi Henkin. It's very. I have, of course, heard of him. The thing is you're going to find it a little bit different, because those halachas are really more geared towards avelut. I think that's where he's going. You'll let me know. I want to find that if anybody attends it, wonderful.
I will let you know. I will email you the link.
Because that's a whole nother thing which we're going to teach, not this year. Give it a year, we'll get to that. Avelut is a whole other study altogether. It's very.
No, but the subject is death and mourning, and whatever the Jewish law.
Right. But it's going to be a correlation. I think it's going to be Avelut, but I could be wrong. Let me know.
Okay.
All right, but beautiful. No, I kol hakavod. You're learning. Everybody should be learning and going to other people. I don't know. I got lots to learn myself. Anyway, so but I'll share what I learned with all of you, and let's get together in 2 weeks. And yeshakoach to Dolores and to Ruth, especially for sharing your two ideas, which we were able to talk about today as part of the class. Very good. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see everybody in shul tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.